live on Sky News Australia. The Rita Panahi Show.
Welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. I'm Liz Storer, and coming up on the show tonight, feeling warm this summer? Well, don't lower the thermostat too much because there might not be enough power to power your air conditioner. Professor Ian Plimer reacts to this genuine warning from the energy regulator later in the show. Also on the show, our very own conservative Santa Claus, Caleb Bond, will join us to laugh along to a very special Lefties Losing It Christmas edition. Later on, I'll be joined live by the brilliant Douglas Murray to discuss the impeachment inquiry coming Joe Biden's way at last. How can the Dems possibly insist there's no evidence of Joe and his son Hunter's corruption? And lastly, Stephanie Bastian of the Women's Forum will be here to answer the very important question posed by the latest episode of Pauline Hanson's Please Explain.
This is a woman-only gym. Girl, please. I've got a court order that says I'm allowed. Check it out.
Why is he even here?
I don't feel comfortable with him here.
Uncomfortable? Well, we'll just have to see about that.
I think Stephanie won't have a problem giving the right answer. But first, we all know the UN is abjectly anti-Israel. Historically, this has always been the case. But in more recent years, this is probably best illustrated by the fact that, according to UN Watch, since 2015, the UN General Assembly has adopted 140 resolutions criticising Israel and just 68 resolutions against all other countries combined. Now, this is utterly laughable when you consider all other countries include the likes of China, Iran, Syria. The list wears long. Flagrant violators of the human rights the UN claims to be arbiter of. But in the months post the massacres of October 7, the UN's utter disregard and disdain for the only democracy in the Middle East has been writ large. To jog your memory, here's the United Nations Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, the biggest of the big cheeses in the UN cesspool. He's speaking just 2 weeks after Hamas's indescribable savagery, before Israel had so much as lifted a finger in retaliation.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced, and their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing.
Just pumping out the Palestinian propaganda. Is it any wonder Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, responded by dubbing the United Nations, quote, a stain on humanity, end quote, given it has shown no humanity to Israel? It took the UN more than 2 months to condemn the unthinkable violation of women that happened on that horrific day. And to this day, the UN has yet to utter a single word of rebuke to Iran, who is bankrolling Hamas in plain sight. It seems Iran can't do any wrong in the eyes of the UN. In fact, Iran chaired the UN's Human Rights Social Council Forum just last month. So, of course, it came as no surprise to anyone this week when the UN adopted a resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. It passed with a large majority of 153 in favour, 10 against, and with 23 cowards, otherwise known as abstentions. Did all 153 member states manage to miss the fact that we literally just had a ceasefire, which came to an abrupt end due to Hamas not honouring the terms? Who knew? You can't negotiate with terrorists. Israel's UN ambassador, again, Gilad Erdan, warned that the UN ceasefire resolution would only make the people of Gaza suffer more.
By voting in favor of this resolution, you are supporting the survival of jihadist terror and the continued suffering of people of Gaza. If this body's intentions are just, Why don't you just start by demanding a ceasefire only from those responsible for violating the past two?
Of course, he was right. Now thoroughly emboldened by the UN's almost unequivocal support, Hamas has said, actually, we're happy to consider coming to this ceasefire party. We'll think about ending the war so long as we're afforded an independent Palestinian state to rule, with Jerusalem as our capital. Thanks very much. Would you like fries on the side? Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh actually thanked the United Nations for their ceasefire vote, which didn't even mention, let alone condemn, his terrorist organisation. Well, you know, you've done the right thing when a terrorist organisation is congratulating you on your decision-making abilities and thanking you for your ongoing support. Anyone who believes the UN still has a single shred of credibility left might want to check their notes now that it's flagrantly in league with a terrorist organisation. The UN is deliberately playing right into Hamas's only media strategy to win hearts and minds around the world by showcasing the devastation they themselves are causing innocent Gazans and placing the blame squarely on Israel. If the UN wanted peace, actually wanted peace, they'd listen to the Israeli ambassador's solution for achieving that peace.
You know what? I have an idea. If you want a real ceasefire, here is the right address. This is the phone number of Hamas's office in Gaza. You can all call.
Go on, UN. Just give this guy a call, for instance. He seems perfectly reasonable. I do have to warn you, what I'm about to play you might be a little bit disturbing for some viewers.
كما قلت وفي كل مرة أكرر إن دماء الأطفال والنساء والشيوخ لا أقول تستصرخكم بل نحن الذين نحتاج هذه الدماء لكي توقظ فينا روح الثورة، لكي توقظ فينا العناد، لكي توقظ فينا التحدي.
Joining me now to discuss this and the week's top stories is Sky News contributor Kosha Garda. Kosha, what are your thoughts on this Hamas UN almost? I mean, these guys just seem to be supporting each other at every turn, not a word of rebuke to Iran, and now calling for a ceasefire when all their beady little eyes were clearly on Israel.
Indeed, and great to be with you, Liz. I think this is just the latest example of the UN having overstayed its relevance, really. I think that's what it boils down to. We see stories come out all the time of how, it's kind of a joke. The countries that are on their Human Rights Council or on different councils make no sense whatsoever. It's almost a paradox, deliberately. And I think in general that's the case. And then you take a look on top of that we are increasingly in a multipolar world where the viewpoint on this issue in particular, I think, has surprised and shocked many people in terms of how widespread it is, the opposition on the issue, where a lot of people might think it wouldn't be. So you add that layer on top, and it just makes the UN a more and more difficult body to understand the relevance of. And one last point I'd make on that is, the largest funder of the UN is my home country, the United States. And even there's so much disparity back home in terms of how people are looking at this issue. And on top of that, people are just increasingly fed up with the waste of taxpayer dollars, US taxpayer dollars, going into things all over the world, including the UN. So I think this issue just really makes all of that come to a head, and maybe at some point you'll see some cracks in it. But for now, this is the kind of stuff we can expect.
Absolutely. I have no doubt that taxpayers in most of those countries do wonder what on earth their ambassadors are doing in all these important meetings, none of which seem to make sense, except especially the UN's picking and choosing who they make head of certain councils is absolutely laughable. But in other news, Kosher, it was a very special day today as late comedian and cultural icon Barry Humphries was honoured in a state memorial at the Opera House. It was attended by some some of Australia's top brass, including former Prime Ministers, screen legends and artists from across the world, with video tributes from fellow icons such as Elton John, Andrew Lloyd Webber and even King Charles III himself. But it was the speeches from some of his own children that gave us an inside glimpse into the man behind Dame Edna.
My favourite smell growing up was the acetone in his little pink pots of nail polish remover. Before each show started, I would sit in his dressing room as he applied makeup, wigs and fake teeth, and then watch him either step into a sequined frock or a totally disturbing fat suit that he wore for Les.
He had this soundtrack of your laughter and, darlings, your laughter. And it's certainly true that there will be much less laughter with his passing.
Also paying tribute today was Rupert Murdoch.
Barry, you will never be strangled. You will never be silenced. Your voice still echoes, your wisdom still enlightens, and your friendship still resides deeply in my heart.
Kosher, it's sad getting older and watching such greats pass away, isn't it? But a fitting farewell.
It is, and I think it was just such a nice moment, a great Australian seeing. It feels more few and far in between, these moments where the whole country can come together and all sorts of people recognizing somebody who was an icon and contributed so much on so many levels. I think also what it brings up for a lot of people is the art of comedy. It's one of the last bastions where you can sort of have fun at things,
Very true.
Make fun at things that sometimes seem absurd, and it's kind of sad to see some of those icons going, but I guess that is the circle of life.
Yes, and given today's culture, we don't know that we'll ever see them replaced, do we? Since no one can really crack the same jokes or pull the same stunts anymore. Well, Chris Minns is ruling out any attempt to redraft his tough anti-protest laws after the Supreme Court gave protesters a green light to block access to major facilities like ports and railway stations. The New South Wales Premier said he was disappointed the court blocked some of his laws, saying they had the potential to stop protesters from acquiring stupid injuries. I thought it was to protect us from being inconvenienced thanks to a handful of people on a soapbox, but okay, Minns.
Can I just cycle all the way back to the reason for these laws being in place and why Labor supported them? People were doing, frankly, stupid things, putting themselves in extreme danger to make what they term political protests, hanging from cranes that were located on top of railway lines, chaining themselves to roads with heavy vehicles operating in the vicinity. It would only take a split second for a worker not to see a protester lying on the ground, for example, to see a tragedy take place.
Here I was, Kosher, thinking that these laws were to stop thousands of people trying to go about their lawful business. But I have said for a long time that the government isn't serious about cracking down on these protesters, given essentially the protesters are championing the government's own green dream.
This is true. You and me both, Liz. I think this is like upside down world over here, that it's reorganize all of society to protect, the rights of the few, or the stupid injuries, as he called it. And it makes no sense. I think, given that there's freedom of speech is not enshrined in the Constitution in Australia, unfortunately, you're always beholden to judicial interpretation. And as you point out, when it's in favor of the governments, I think we might see more and more of that being conveniently interpreted in a certain way. And the other side is just going to have to fight back in the court system.
100%. As has already been pointed out, the state government could, of course, contest this. We could take it all the way to the High Court. But we both know they won't. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Well, earlier today, Steve Miles was sworn in as Queensland's 40th Premier.
I promise to work day and night to earn the trust of Queenslanders. I am a Queenslander born and bred, and to serve as your Premier is the greatest honour.
The former deputy also announced the 5 new members of his cabinet.
We asked the caucus to provide us with fresh faces, with a new team. And I'm pleased to say there will be 5 new ministers in the First Miles government. The new ministers are Nikki Boyd, Bart Mellish, Lance McCallum, Michael Healy and Charisse Naumis. Mullen. Sorry. I've known Charisse for too long.
I've known her for a long time.
Well, he's off to a great start. Joining me now is Liberal National Party MP for Groom, Garth Hamilton. Garth, I've been watching this guy all week and I've got to say he doesn't look up to the job. Every time I've seen him, he looks like he's sweating bullets. Here's Exhibit A. You've got to watch this.
Did you ask Anastasia Palaszczuk to go? Did you betray the Premier?
No. The first I heard of Anastasia's plans were a phone call. She did me the service of contacting me just prior to her announcement. I had no other involvement with it. As some of you might be aware, I spent the entirety of last week overseas representing our government at the United Nations Climate Conference.
Garth, where did Anastasia's little yapper go? He's ascended the throne thanks to a pile of shady union backroom deals, and now he just appears terrified.
I'd say he's lost his mojo. I'm not sure he had any to begin with, but he's got the look of a man who's clinging on dearly just before the car crash. The impact really hits. But look, this is a guy who's played a very clear role very closely to the previous Premier and been involved in all of her mistakes, all of the crises that are involved in Queensland, everything that we've seen. From youth crime, ambulance ramping, infrastructure blowouts. He's had a key role in all of that. Now he's trying to pretend very, very hard, Liz, that there's fresh faces, that there's change. There's absolutely no change. This is just continuing on exactly the same Labor government that we've seen drive Queensland into a very sorry state.
Yeah, obviously they're trying to do some sort of a rebrand, rebuild after the bruising polling that showed this government was well and truly on the ropes. Do you think this switcheroo is going to fool anyone into voting for more of the same next October? Do you think this is potentially the silver bullet for the LNP to finally win it back next year?
Well, look, I don't think he's a very serious person, but I think it's a serious problem. What you can see straight away, though, they're willing to do whatever it takes to win. After 10 years of deriding Campbell Newman, one of his first policies is to take up a Newman-era policy in freezing car regos, straight out of the 2012 playbook. This is something that he'd argued against personally. He's rolled over very quickly on an independent authority on the Olympics, again, straight from the LNP. Look, they'll do whatever it takes, and I guess that makes them that little bit dangerous at this point in time. What we need to do, and what the LNP in Queensland have been doing a great job of keeping focused on the right priorities, and I think that's what's going to separate them from a Labor government that clearly lost track, got involved in the projects that had no connection to the challenges that we've been facing across the state.
100%, which is why the state has had to sit back and just watch those same problems get progressively worse. I must say, David Crucifulli has to be one of the most impressive, if not the most impressive, no, I would say the most impressive, opposition leader in the country at the moment. I do like his chances come October.
Yeah, look, he's doing a great job and he's got a great team behind him. But it is really important for us to remind everybody that this is the same Labor government, exactly the same Labor government. This was a government that's followed on from, I remember Premier Palaszczuk crying when she lost her $500,000 a year job. Didn't cry to victims of crime in our area.
No.
When kids can't afford a house, that didn't trouble her. So we really saw where their focus was, and I have no doubt it's going to continue to be very self-absorbed.
Well, indeed. Let's hoping it is more of the same so Queenslanders can come to their senses next October. Garth Hamilton, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Liz.
Still to come, a Christmas-themed Lefties losing it with our own jolly red-cheeked and bearded fellow, Caleb Bond. And Douglas Murray will join me live. That's after this. Welcome back. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Joining me for everyone's favourite segment is a man who needs no introductions, Sky News host Caleb Bond. You know, Caleb, if you sprayed your hair white, you'd make a great Santa.
Are you calling me fat? I mean, it sounds as if... Excuse me.
Nothing to do with his
I come on this show
rotundness.
and you insult me within 30 seconds. Unbelievable.
Simply an observation. Look, it is that magical time of the year, so naturally the climate cult have turned their attention to attacking Christmas trees. Because their religion sucks, they get jealous of Christians and Catholics around this time of year. It makes perfect sense, really. So in Germany, they've been targeting trees all over the shop. Take a look. Caleb, why don't these people do something actually useful, like plant trees or pick up litter or, I don't know, clean the ocean?
Well, I suppose if you're that miserable, you'd want to attack all the nice things like Christmas, wouldn't you? I mean, look, if you drill down into what these people actually believe in, all of these climate activists, it's not just about climate. They want to revolutionise the entire world. It's Marxism at its core. So all the symbols of what makes the West great and the things that we enjoy, such as Christmas, become a target of them. I mean, what did we see earlier in the year? They targeted the wedding of a British politician. On and on this stuff goes. They're targeting major sporting events like Wimbledon and the Ashes. You know, they go after things that symbolise what we love in the West. I mean, how miserable do you have to be? Go and have a nice Christmas roast and a glass of red or maybe a glass of white wine here in Australia where it's a bit warmer. Just calm down and enjoy yourself, for heaven's sake.
Well, I can't imagine they're endearing anyone to their cause, especially with well, they love targeting major artworks, don't they? The classics.
Right,
it's always the classics. It's never that horrible modern stuff with a line through it or something that your 3-year-old could have done. They're always trying to trash the classics.
Well, if they did it to one of those sort of abstract pieces, it'd look no different. There'd be no particular point to doing it, would there?
It's so true. And in more of the lefty Christmas spirit, Boston Mayor Wu has apologised for her blacks-only Christmas party invitation. Check this out. This was emailed from her office, and just 15 minutes later, she sent another email apologising. Not apologising to Rosa Parks for her segregated party. Oh, no. She apologised for accidentally inviting some white people. Her second email read, "I wanted to apologise for my previous email regarding a holiday party for tomorrow. I did send that to everyone by accident, and I apologise if my email may have offended or come across as so. Sorry for any confusion this may have caused." This is just unbelievable stuff, and yet here is Mayor Wu backing herself in.
I think we've had individual conversations with everyone so people understand that it was truly just an honest mistake that went out in typing the email field, and I look forward to celebrating with everyone at the holiday parties that we will have besides this one as well. So it is my intention that we can again be a city that lives our values and create space for all kinds of communities to come together.
A space for all kinds of communities to come together, clearly not Mayor Wu. Caleb, can you imagine the response if someone tried to hold a whites-only event? It'd be the last thing they ever did.
Well, it mightn't be the last thing they ever did, because then they'd have to go off to the gulag and there's plenty of things they'd have to do in there. I mean, it is extraordinary that you would even think to have an event specifically only for elected members who are of colour, as she puts it. I mean, you know, I don't know. You have to do all these modules. Anyone who works in an office would know, you know, the bosses send you all these bloody modules you've got to do about harassment and sexual harassment and bullying and all this stuff. And they make it very clear that anything that you do that excludes another person is a form of bullying. So surely this is a form of racial bullying. As you say, it wouldn't cut the other way. You'd be out of a job if it happened the other way. But this is the absurdity of it all, because if there are enough council members of colour to make up a Christmas party, then clearly they don't have any problem with racism on that council in terms of getting people elected, do they?
Indeed, it seems racism only goes one way. Quickly back home now, where Stonington Council in Victoria has cancelled the word Christmas, instead decorating their wealthy suburbs with nonsensical signs that read, "Make merry," because they want to be inclusive. Who exactly is Christmas excluding? If you want to celebrate, celebrate. If you don't participate. Like me, every Ramadan. Here's 3AW's Mark Allen taking aim at these Stonington flogs.
If there's anybody out there from Stonington, please call in and tell me what's offensive about the word Christmas.
I haven't seen a protest.
Please someone tell me what's offensive about the word Christmas. These people are nutcases.
You are angry. You are angry.
They're off their heads.
You've gone ham on this.
They're off their heads, these people.
Bataki ham you've gone.
Bring Christmas back.
I'm with you.
We're basically being told, let's cancel Christmas so we don't offend minorities, but it's okay to offend the majority and just call it inclusivity. That's fine.
Well, the only people they're trying not to offend ultimately are the white people who have a problem with Christmas themselves. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find any migrant in this country who actually has a problem with Christmas.
Indeed.
No one is offended by Christmas except the lefties who get offended on behalf of others.
Caleb Bond, thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure.
Still to come, Douglas Murray joins me live and geologist Ian Plimer breaks down even more climate myths pushed by those at COP28 and the energy regulators warning to us all that there might not be enough power for all our air conditioners this summer. That's right after this. Welcome back. This week, our Prime Minister joined the leaders of New Zealand and Canada in calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, expressing alarm at the diminishing safe space for civilians in Gaza. Australia's position on this war is now utter nonsense. You cannot, as the Prime Minister's shared statement does, on the one hand, recognise that Hamas must return the hostages and be removed from power, and on the other hand, call for a ceasefire, which would mean Hamas remains in power and repeats October 7 as quickly as possible and as many times as possible, which is exactly what they have threatened to do. Then at the United Nations, our Australian representative voted in favour of the aforementioned UN ceasefire resolution that didn't even mention Hamas by name, much less condemn it in any way, shape or form. That resolution passed despite Israel and America voting against it. The UK cowardly abstained. This is a complete betrayal of Israel by those in the West, who for weeks have, as our Prime Minister has, turned a blind eye to rampant anti-Semitism, which history attests has destroyed humanity and civilizations before. In the meantime, Hamas continues to spill the blood of the very Palestinian people they claim to fight for, while continuing to slaughter innocent Israelis, including those they took hostage. I've said it 1,000 times before, I'll say it 1,000 times more. Every single drop of Gazan blood spilled in this conflict is on Hamas's hands. These people are animals. And yet in the United Nations' eyes and in the eyes of our Western leaders, it seems, it is Israel who needs to cool it with the war crimes. Joining me now is a staunch Israel ally, the author of best-selling books such as The War on the West, The Strange Death of Europe, and Islamophilia, a very metropolitan malady. Douglas Murray. Douglas, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Great to be with you.
Cheers. What do you make of these domino prime ministers falling straight into Hamas's basically only media strategy, which is use the suffering of those that we are creating, use it to win the hearts and minds of the West by merely pointing the finger straight at Israel, even though we're the very cause for it?
Yeah, I think it's you put your finger on it. That's exactly what Hamas do. Hamas targeted innocent civilians in Israel on October the 7th. And it's a pretty unique terror organization, Hamas, or an unusual one, because, yes, it then wishes to use any innocent civilians in Gaza as collateral to their, or indeed the main attack point for their war. I mean, no other... I can't think of an army that has behaved like this in history, which is one of the reasons why Hamas is not an army. It's a terror group. It literally puts civilians in front of its own terrorists. It literally puts civilian buildings above its own terrorist infrastructure, its weapons storage units, its missile storage, and indeed its leaders. This is a sort of cowardly way in which Hamas acts. But as for the Australian government, I think it's been a lamentable episode. Immediately after October 7th, the Australian government said that they would stand staunchly beside Israel and for civilized values. We then see the first vote at the UN, and the Australian government quite rightly doesn't vote for this ceasefire because it doesn't condemn Hamas. And then exactly the same motion comes back a little while later at the UN, and the Australian government goes with it. It shows a terrible lack of leadership. But I would add one other thing. It shows that the current Australian government is very easily swayed. It shows that you just have to have, in this case, like one Muslim minister who breaks ranks and should have been fired for breaking ranks and not having collective responsibility, but breaks ranks and is then not fired, and instead the government adapts to his point of view. You have that, and then you have the fact that, some thousands of Australian Hamas supporters and weirdo leftist activists turn out on the streets of Australian cities, like in other Western cities. The fact that these people turn out seems to have done a great deal to persuade the Australian government. Well, I would have a warning for them, which is watch out, because other people will get in on that trick. When people scent the blood in the water, scent that you're this easily swayed and influenced, my goodness, other people are going to be coming at you as well.
I don't think there's many Australians who would disagree that we have an incredibly weak government. And I've said from the very beginning, this Prime Minister has always been pro-Palestinian. You can watch videos of him with very youthful looks, talking very passionately for the pro-Palestinian cause. On to other news now. I've got to get your thoughts on the US House of Reps has, of course, voted on Wednesday to launch an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden to examine whether he improperly benefited from his son's Hunter's foreign business dealings. I mean, Reuters says they've done this even though they have yet to find evidence of wrongdoing. That seems to be straight out of the Dems playbook. But is this Christmas come early or what, Douglas? Obviously, we've got the bank reports, we've got Devon Archer, Hunter's former business partner's testimony. We know that there's no evidence. Are you hopeful this inquiry will at last reveal the extent of that family's corruption?
Well, I'm hopeful that it could try to get a bit closer to the truth. Hunter Biden gave a press conference this week in which he said, I'm here. People say, where's Hunter? Well, I'm here. And you think, yeah, like 6 years after everyone was asking. 5 years, 3 years. I mean, it's a really remarkable thing to sort of present himself as having been always open for questioning and always keen to answer any press queries or indeed legal queries. He's done exactly the opposite. And he did he did a very interesting move, which was that perhaps the inevitable one, doubtless, PR'd to death beforehand. But he appealed to the sort of sympathies of the public. He kept referring to the fact that his life had been in disarray, that he referred to his brother. He referred to his father. He talked about, his addiction problems and all that, and indeed, that his life had been in disarray because of his addiction problems around the time some of the allegations happened. Now, this is a very interesting thing, of course, because he does play to, in America, you've always got a kind of 50-50 political divide. There will be some people who will look at that and will say, poor Hunter, everyone's sympathetic to people with addictions and people who've wrecked their lives in some way, which he certainly has, albeit in a very privileged way. There will be some people who look at that and actually feel sorry for him and think, yeah, kind of lay off. I mean, it's true that, as he said, it's embarrassing for him. Naked photos of himself have gone all around the world. They've been held up in the House. But just calling for pity or sympathy doesn't seem to me to be really enough, because Hunter Biden still has serious questions to answer about his business dealings. He talked about how proud he was to have been on the board of several companies, but he didn't say why he was on the board of those companies or what he brought to them or what his work was or indeed what the family cut was. We know from some of the leaked emails that were on the laptop that there were kickbacks within the family. So he can have our sympathy, but only after he's been frank and full and honest about what actually went on. And I think a lot of people realize he just hasn't been. The family haven't been. Everyone else can see the influence peddling operation that seems to have been going on, which is, I have to say, endemic within American politics. But I think that he can only get the kind of sympathy he wants if he's also frank, and that seems to be a million miles away at the moment.
He seems to be taking his best stab at it, though, doesn't he? Like, look at me being authentic. I'm here. I'm ready to talk. God help us. Sorry.
And then he didn't, of course.
Yes, and then he didn't
answer questions that didn't.
Of course. I can't wait for this inquiry. As we know, it'll have far greater reaching powers to demand what people need to see, hence the point of an impeachment inquiry. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening. Well, days after the COP28 climate summit in Dubai agreed to a, quote, transition away from fossil fuels, end quote, the Australian energy market operator has issued a warning over the stability of our energy grid. AEMO warns the nation needs to double the planned rollout, double it, of new power lines by the end of the decade, or we'll face more frequent blackouts. Joining me now is geologist Ian Plimer. Ian, thanks so much for being here. How's it going?
Not too bad, thanks, Liz.
Terrific. Do you think this will rush renewables end in disaster? I mean, it's already looking like an absolute disaster. We're not touching anywhere close to all the targets. And now we're being told we've got to rush what we're already not pulling off whatsoever?
Well, the net zero agenda is economically and technologically utopian, and it's been like that for a very long time. And the chickens are coming home. At COP, which was we've had 28 of these. And I don't see, if we'd had a major problem, where they couldn't have solved this in 2 or 3 meetings. But it seems a massive jaunt for people to go there in private jets and eat meat and have a great time with all their mates and see you later, we'll see you next year. But they're talking about a transition. And at COP, Iraq said that they need all the money from oil so they can address climate change. Germany shut down 3 nuclear power plants and coal is phasing out, but they're planning to build 40 new gas power plants.
Oh, of course.
Instead of phasing out, they just realised that they can't power a country on renewables alone. You have to have huge technological changes before you can store large amounts of electricity. We have more than 1,000 new coal plants being planned globally, and India is increasing its coal production. So it wasn't really a climate conference. It was a conference about energy and how some countries, like our country Australia, where we sent our minister who's got the personality of a wet cardboard box, that minister was saying we want to increase our renewables. Other countries are talking about tripling their nuclear power. And the energy costs have forced people to focus their minds. And the political mood is changing as a result of the energy costs. So COP now is a giant party for idealists. We pay for it as taxpayers, and if they're successful in doing what they want to do, we actually end up paying even more money for an even greater mess, and that's having a double grid system, which is unreliable.
I got to tell you, in watching the climate protesters, which we always bag out, and rightly so, it makes me wonder, why aren't everyday people like ourselves taking to the streets and being just as passionate about the fact that this is a ridiculous, nonsensical, unexplained agenda that is costing our nation its prosperity, that is going to increasingly cost individuals dearly. I mean, it was just yesterday, New South Wales residents were even being encouraged to ration their power to ease the strain on the grid. Here's the New South Wales Energy Minister, Penny Sharp, yesterday.
We're asking, households and businesses to think about what they can defer between 5 and 9 o'clock tonight. So if you can turn your air conditioning up a little bit, over about 24 is fantastic. If you can make sure that you don't use your dryers or your dishwashers or your pool pumps between sort of 5 and 9 p.m. tonight, that will all help.
And then we've got the minister that you referred to, the fellow with the dryers and arrowroot biscuit personality, Chris Bowen. He's off in COP28 still saying, no, we've got to get rid of fossil fuels. He was one of the ones leading the charge saying, oh, this thing doesn't have enough teeth, let's add to it.
Well, we saw it with The Voice. People just got sick of being lectured to, being told how to live their life, being told how to spend their money, and they just kept quiet. And when it came to the vote, then people voted. And the same will happen with climate. People are absolutely sick of being told they're going to fry and die. People are being sick that this is the hottest day or hottest month or hottest year. They know it's rubbish. They have common sense, and they're just keeping their powder dry. And if Mr Dutton wants to win the next election, all he's got to do is to address immigration, and the second thing is address the cost of living, mainly that is energy. That's all he's got to do, and just point out the ridiculousness of our energy systems, and that we have in Australia some of the greatest forms of energy available. We're not using them, and it's costing people too much. So I think it's a very, very simple solution. We've let the Greens out there, let them out of the kindergarten ground. They've played with our grid. They've played with electricity. They've got it wrong. It's cost us a fortune. Now it's time to lock them up.
Well, I can't disagree with you there. I hope Dutton was listening and taking notes, because I don't doubt that would do him very well at the election, which is what we're all hoping for. Ian Plimer, thank you so much for your time this evening. Still to come, Pauline Hanson's Please Explain asks, what is a woman? Stephanie Bastian joins me to inject some common sense into the debate. That's right after this. Welcome back. Pauline Hanson's latest Please Explain cartoon has dared to ask the question that many leftist politicians dread to answer. What is a woman? Take a look.
Well, hello, ladies. It's me, Euphigenia Galbanese. Albo, we know it's you.
And no, you can't sit with us.
Yeah, this is for women only.
Oh, really? Well, we'll just have to see about that. Read it quick, ladies. I'm legally a woman, and you have to let me sit with you by order of the court. What? That's right, it's the law.
Joining me now is Stephanie Bastian, Research Fellow at Women's Forum Australia. Stephanie, we've watched many a politician flounder when asked this simple question. Let's have a quick look.
To be honest, Sean, that question's come slightly out of left field for me. People define themselves, people define their own genders.
There are a number of people who genuinely believe that they are trapped in the wrong body and they want to be recognised as the gender that their mind and soul have for always told them that they are.
Now the top psychiatry college in Australia is finally realising that the evidence on transgender healthcare and the use of puberty blockers in children is shifting against the cultural narrative that it's, quote, treat them or they'll die, end quote. The Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists are declining to endorse gender-affirming care as the key intervention for gender dysmorphic children, saying while several major professional organisations support the use of puberty suppressants and cross-sex hormones for adolescents, health authorities in some European countries recommend restrictions be placed on their use. Australian and New Zealand paediatric services continue to provide multidisciplinary gender-affirming care. Stephanie, what do you make of this? Because this is not the first time that we've seen doctors, specifically paediatricians, working in these relevant fields, come out and say, we are not comfortable, basically following the guidelines that are being shoved down our throats. This whole gender affirmative care, we can't morally agree to it.
Good evening, Liz, and thank you for having me on tonight. Look, this statement is significant. It completely ratifies particularly psychiatrists like Dr. Gillian Spencer, who has been suspended over saying these exact things. This statement goes further than that, though, because it acknowledges the fact that there are detransitioners and the fact that we do not know the statistics on the regret rates for people who regret their decision to transition. On top of that, it also acknowledges that there are comorbidities in terms of mental health issues that accompany gender dysphoria. So overall, this statement goes a lot further than it has in the past, and that is a really positive step. However, the real issue is our state legislation. So at the moment, for example, in Victoria, gender-affirming care is legislated under our conversion therapy laws. And what that means is that for medical professionals who do not believe someone should be transitioning, particularly in the case of minors, they have no option under law except to affirm that person's gender medically. So while this is a step in the right direction, we actually have a lot of work to do, and I hope that this statement brings the further push for an inquiry. We desperately need one in order to be able to ascertain exactly what's going on and to enact some change. We know it's there, it's happened overseas. We know the CAS review is shortly to be delivered. Every politician in this country knows there are issues, every doctor, and so the time is now to have an inquiry to bring out some change.
I couldn't agree more, Stephanie, but we do know those in the Senate have tried, and their attempt to just get an inquiry into the gender-affirming care that is taking place in our country at the moment, and many professionals have spoken out with concerns they wouldn't even have an inquiry. What do you have to lose? You've got to wonder why this is being seemingly pushed even by those in power. Do you think there's any hope that we'd actually get such an inquiry up?
Look, South Australia is the third body of government to put forward an inquiry. Obviously, Victoria's motion got voted down, as did Senator Antics in the Senate. There is another motion that's going ahead in South Australia that is due for a vote.
Sorry, Stephanie, we are out of time. We are out of time, but thank you so much for your time this evening.